Since earliest times, humans have recognized that water could purify, heal, and rejuvenate. We built temples and created rituals to honor its sacred and mystical qualities. It is the most abundant and fundamental element of the earth. We drink it, bathe in it, play in it, are totally surrounded by it at the very beginning of life. Without water, there would be no plants, no food, no fish, no birds, no people, no life. But now, scientists, environmentalists, and tribal elders are telling us that Earth's water is endangered, and therefore life itself is threatened, because we have forgotten or ignored the precious nature of this gift.
Water is this amazing element. Whenever I am in water, I just can't help but looking at it and thinking, oxygen and hydrogen, these two things came together on this planet and created all of life. And it's the most magic thing I can think of. I write about water, and I think about it all the time.
Award-winning poet and novelist Linda Hogan has her roots in the Native American tradition. A Chickasaw by birth, her writing expresses her lifelong love of the living world and all its inhabitants.
In all the cultures I've looked at, including in Australia, that all of the traditional people, the finest thinkers, talk about water being an animate being. Nothing is taken out of the context, so water is sacred as water and not just used for some human purpose. The idea is to respect water all the time. It's really important that we think that way, that we look at it as an alive thing, that the world is alive and that we're responsible for that life. One of the things about going in a raft through the Grand Canyon that was so exciting for me was that feeling of my own body wishing to join the water in its rush toward sea level. I had never thought before about how all water wants to do is go to sea level, and it will do anything to get there. It's a desperate character when it comes to getting to its destination. But I actually felt that the body, my body, the water in my own body, wanted to move with it. And it took me about 3 or 4 days off the river to get rid of the feeling of my body being in motion in that direction. It was a cellular movement.
Robert Hass, a naturalist and Pulitzer Prize-winning poet, also teaches university students and in inner-city schools. For 3 years, he served at the Library of Congress in Washington as the Poet Laureate of the United States. There, he helped create a project very dear to his heart called River of Words.
The form this took was putting together a poetry contest and an art contest for kids on the theme of getting to know their own watershed, the rivers and creeks of the places where they live. Doesn't matter whether they're urban children or suburban children or whether they live in the country, their relationship to water is so fundamental. We thought that a way to get the attention of the children and get the attention of local newspapers so that the artwork and the poetry would flow back into the community was to have a payoff. And so each year, 8 winners, 4 in art and 4 in poetry, come to Washington, D.C., read their poems at the Library of Congress, and have their art displayed there. One of the wonderful works of art was a painting by a young boy in Florida who's a Thai refugee. The title was "My Precious Water, I Kiss You." This painting came out of the experience of a child who spent his early years in a refugee camp. Again, it was a case of the kids teaching us. We talk about knowing your rivers, but this boy understood the blessing and the good luck of living in a place in a way that we really didn't. There is this image by Maria Korsgaard, who's a 11th grader, junior in high school, from New Jersey, that works as if it were an etching. She makes lots of small circles and lots of intricate patterns, out of which, look at with a squint, it looks like you could be looking through a magnifying glass at a cell, at the structure of life itself. And then if you back up a little bit with its colors, you can see that it's rendering a fish in a stream. There was a wonderful poem by a boy from the Bolinas School, not far from here, Toby Earnhardt Gold. It was alive and alert and informed to the place where that boy lived.
This place. The creek runs past a fallen grandmother bay tree, over stones smoothed by the centuries. The ripples seem to be everlasting. A buckeye leaf floats down the creek, while the wrentit sings and the sword fern stands guard. Five-finger ferns peek over the edge. The love in this place is like a child's heart.
I think it's important to have kids understand that part of their education is the education in the place where they live, and that an informed knowledge of the place and the experience of people who are working to save the environment in the place where they live will give them a sense of hope and power that we're going to need if we're going to take care of this land in the next century.
I've always been fascinated with the life forms that form in water because they aren't encumbered by 4 legs, 2 legs, arms, and feet. They can be any form they want to, so you get starburst shapes and things that collapse in on themselves and things that are long sheets and tentacles and tubes that withdraw into themselves and just endless, endless forms.
Susan Zwinger is an award-winning author and naturalist who also volunteers her energies for the preservation of wildlife and its habitats. She has worked in Alaska as an interpretive ranger for the National Park Service and taught at all levels, from elementary school to the university.
I believe that water is alive. Now, maybe it's not a one being with a consciousness, but it's many, many. It's a system, and it's an ecosystem, and it's something that ties the entire planet together. When I view water and I look at individual nudibranchs or anemones or the whole algae or cyanobacteria on the surface of the ocean, I look at those as a system. One doesn't exist without the other. And we wouldn't exist without them because the organisms on top of the ocean help feed oxygen to the atmosphere. We're all in this together. I've been thinking a lot about the Codex Leicester by Leonardo da Vinci. The first part of his life, he was more into drawing machines and mechanics. In this last part, he began a larger series of drawings, which was all to do with water. Just beautiful, just lyrical. And it's all about the forms and shapes and causes of different waves and the titles. And he constantly uses metaphors like the water, the streams and the rivers are the arteries and the veins of the planet. And are the tides caused by the sun and the moon, or are they merely the breathing of the earth? Being near water, being near the ocean, puts me very near the power and the rhythm of the universe. And so I feel very small, but in a wonderful way. I feel that pulse. I feel that breathing that Leonardo talked about, the breathing of this earth. And I need that.
Perhaps best known for his book, The Man Who Walked Through Time, Colin Fletcher, at age 67, decided to make a solo journey down the entire 1,700-mile length of the Colorado River. It took him 6 months and resulted in his latest book, River, One Man's Journey Down the Colorado, Source to Sea.
The thoughts that went through my mind on the river journey cover the whole spectrum. That's one of the reasons for doing a journey like this, that you have time to let. In the placid parts, or the slower parts, not in the rapids. The rapids engulf you, I mean, mentally as well. What the river allowed me to do, which I think is the most important thing about journeys in wilderness, is it lets you, insofar as it's possible, move outside the human species and look at us from the outside. The journey that I took, which is the journey of any particle of water down the river, has very natural parallels in the journey of a life, of a human life, a single individual life, of a family, a community, a nation, or even of the whole of life, a species, or the whole of life on Earth. Water is the element of life. So it's not surprising that a river becomes a great metaphor for life.
Just as Leonardo da Vinci had been fascinated by the movement and dynamics of water in the early 16th century, so too in the mid-20th century was a German scientist named Theodor Schwenk.
This book, Sensitive Chaos by Theodor Schwenk, has a lot of very interesting things to say about water. One of them is, man's relationship to water has changed completely during the last few centuries. The more man learned to know about the physical nature of water, and to use it technically, the more his knowledge of the soul and spirit of this element faded, until at last they came to treat it merely as a substance and a means of transmitting energy. A river that has been artificially straightened out looks lifeless and dreary. It indicates the inner landscape in the souls of men who no longer know how to move with the rhythms of living nature. Together, earth, plant world and atmosphere form a single great organism in which water streams like living blood. Do I feel that water has a sacred quality? I'm not at ease with the word sacred when I look at it closely, so I'm not absolutely sure how I can explain it. But after all, the planet would be lifeless without water. And if that isn't sacred, I don't know what is.
I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans. And I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. Langston Hughes.
Jennifer Green has been involved with the study of water all her life. Today, as director of the Water Research Institute of Blue Hill in Maine, she lectures in schools, universities, and at conferences around the world.
We look at water as it shows its many, many faces. Mud puddles and streams and rivers and lakes. In oceans, the phenomena of water and water movement. And what we have found through water movement, the how of its movement, the way it moves, its behavior, is that there's a correlation, a fascinating correlation, a morphological correlation between the forms and rhythms of water movement and many forms and rhythms found in the organic world, in the living world. We can learn an enormous amount if we allow water to speak to us about her nature. When two streams move in the same direction, at differing speeds, there begins this kind of curling in of the inner boundary. In embryology, wherever we see this folding in, we see new tissues occurring, new organs, and in the fluidity of the world, new life forms, life. In a river you have it along the banks, around the rocks, along the bottoms. Wherever you get a stream of water moving more quickly than another, you get this folding back, and you get these back eddies, and you get these little areas of rest, and you get tremendous amount of life. But when we begin to describe, for instance, the movement of a vortex, and find that the center of the vortex is moving very, very quickly, and the periphery, the watery periphery of that vortex is movement of the planets about the sun. Those nearest the sun move incredibly quickly, and those further out move very, very slowly. So water in its movement has a deep connection with the cosmos. What we're trying to do is to deepen our consciousness of water, and by doing so, hoping to effect a different and more consequent stewardship of this element of water as a purveyor for life. It is a sacred element. We must find the sacred in it again.
Trained as a marine zoologist, David White now works full-time as a poet, reading and lecturing in public and corporate settings throughout the United States, Canada, and Europe.
In order to see the sacredness of anything, whether it's water or any part of the natural world, you need to spend time alone with it in contemplation, experiencing its different facets, and establishing the inner correspondences between the water and your own place in the world, allowing your imagination to work with the flow and movement of this astonishing medium. I have a poem, and it looks at the flow of water in the Puget Sound area where I live. I was out on a boat, floating around, looking at all this water beneath us, holding me up. And then I was looking at the clouds in the air and seeing how they were dispersed through all of the atmosphere. And then I was looking at the snow on the mountains, which are both sides of the Sound, the Olympic Mountains and the Cascades stretching north and south, and realizing that there was water in almost a full 360-degree circle, and I just happened to be floating on this medium when it was in only one part of its character, you know. But it took a little while, you know, just to settle into that place, to allow myself to look at the world a little more strangely, you know, and therefore see it for the first time. So I wrote this poem. It's called Where Many Rivers Meet. All the water below me came from above. All the clouds living in the mountains gave it to the rivers, who gave it to the sea, which was their dying. And so I float on cloud become water. Central sea surrounded by white mountains, the water salt, once fresh, cloudfall and stream rush, tree root and tide bank leading to the river mouths, and the mouths of the rivers sing into the sea. The stories buried in the mountains give out into the sea, and the sea remembers, and the sea remembers, and sings back from the depths where nothing is forgotten. And the sea remembers and sings back from the depths where nothing is forgotten. I think one of the qualities of water which is so entrancing is that when you look into a depth of water, into the sea or into a lake, you see both depth and reflection at the same time. You are both looking into something which is totally and sacredly other than you, and which is hidden from you, and you are also looking at a version of yourself staring back at you, but one that is transformed and textured by the quality of the water that's either still or flowing beneath you. And I think that's a really amazing thing when you think about it, that you would see both those things at the same time. You would look at yourself, but you could also look through yourself at the same time and know that whatever surface identity you had established for yourself, it was simply something shimmering on the surface of something that went far deeper and was traveling to the sea, to this place where all things meet and are returned and cycled and eventually evaporated too back into the sky. Water is the great medium that brings together so many different forms, you know. It brings minerals down from the mountains and out into the ocean. It brings the salmon up into the mountains with all the minerals that they are carrying there and the stories of the sea into the mountains. It brings different weather systems, you know, across the Atlantic and water which is formed over the Canadian tundra and drop on the north of England. It's the way that the natural world is speaking to each other. It is, you know, water is the sacred speech of nature in a way. Water is the sacred conversation, the intimate conversation of one part of the natural world to the other.
We are not and cannot be separate from water. We live in an interconnected, interdependent world, and water, the precious gift of life for all living things, is a constant reminder that we are one.